In an executioner's special box lie numbered knives. These are not weapons of rage, but the tools of a bureaucrat. Each number corresponds to a specific part of the body. Each incision is not an act of sadism, but a meticulously executed step in a state ritual. This is what absolute, systemic control over the body looks like. Now, let's shift to another scene. A quiet party meeting. There is no smell of blood here, only the scent of damp wool coats and cheap tobacco. An intellectual, yesterday's hero, stands up and, in a steady voice, begins to destroy himself. He confesses to thought crimes. He betrays his friends. He renounces everything he once believed in. On one hand, a body destroyed from the outside. On the other, a personality destroyed from within. Where is the true total control here? In which of these scenes did the state achieve a more complete victory? The answer is hidden in the evolution of the concept of pain itself. And this evolution shatters all conventional logic. Why did the victims of Mao's re-education become the most ardent supporters of the regime, while the victims of physical executions often maintained their dignity to the end? Where is the flaw in the formula that pain equals submission? Why did the imperial system, after centuries of perfecting the ritual of physical destruction, fail to understand that by attacking the body, it was leaving the main citadel untouched, the consciousness, and the ultimate question of scale? How did Mao Zedong compel tens of millions of people to participate in mutual criticism sessions when controlling a single person during Lingchi required an executioner, guards, and an entire public square? Tens of millions of participants, more than the entire population of Australia and New Zealand combined, were transformed into a single mechanism of mutual pressure. This video is not a history lesson. It is a dissection of a technology. By the end, you will no longer perceive violence and control solely as physical acts. You will gain a tool that allows you to see the skeleton of psychological pressure beneath the flesh of ordinary words. You will learn to recognize three key techniques: induced guilt, social isolation, and group pressure. Milder versions of these techniques surround us everywhere: in online bullying, in corporate cultures of self-criticism, in political propaganda. Understanding their roots is a form of defense. Have you ever had to publicly agree with the majority opinion just to avoid conflict? To understand this mechanism, we will follow a clear map. It consists of three key points. In 3 minutes, we will find ourselves in a public square in Imperial China. We will analyze the mechanics of death by 1,000 cuts in detail to understand why it was more a ritualistic theater than a mere execution. 11 minutes from now, we will witness a pivotal moment: the official abolition of Lingchi. We will prove that this was not an act of humanism, but an admission of its ineffectiveness. It was here that the invisible knife of psychological pressure was born. And 19 minutes from now, we will enter the mind of an enemy of the people. At the moment of his final confession, we will see from the inside how the brainwashing machine works. Our journey begins now. First stop, the theater of absolute pain. Cold steel, a precise number, a strict sequence. Why did sadism need bureaucracy? Why did the ritual of destroying a body require a protocol worthy of a surgeon? The obvious answer: fear. The slower and more agonizing a public death, the greater the terror in the eyes of the crowd. This is the simple arithmetic of power. More pain equals more submission. But this arithmetic failed on September 22nd, 1630. On a Beijing square, General Yuan Chenghuan was executed. According to witnesses, he endured the torture without a single groan. He did not beg for mercy. If the victim is not broken, the spectacle has failed. The true goal was not pain. It was the destruction of what the Chinese call face, honor, status, and dignity. The real execution took place in the eyes of the crowd, but this focus on external destruction exposed a fundamental vulnerability in the entire imperial philosophy of control. Why stretch the agony out for hours when you could kill in a second? From the perspective of ending a life, Lingchi is a demonstrably inefficient method. What is the logic behind this lack of haste? Physiology suggests that after a certain time, the body enters a state of shock. Pain receptors are overloaded. Consciousness fades. The victim ceases to feel the full extent of the suffering. This makes the method imperfect, even as a tool of torture. But the state was not attacking nerve endings. It was attacking social bonds. The process worked like a slow erosion. One cut severed the person from their family, another from their ancestors, a third from their honor. The body was merely the canvas on which a picture of total social banishment was painted. Lingchi was a technology for turning a person into a non-person while they were still alive. But what if you could achieve the same result while leaving the body completely unharmed? At the executions, vendors sold steamed buns, or mantu. They were dipped in the blood of the dying and sold as medicine. How could such primitive barbarism become part of a calculated date ritual? The simple explanation is deep-seated folk superstition, a belief in the magical power of blood that the state did not discourage. This seems like a side effect, not part of the design. In reality, it was the logical conclusion of the ritual. The criminal was not just banished. His body, his life force, was symbolically dismantled and consumed by society. His individuality was completely erased, dissolved into the crowd. The price for such bloody mantu was 10 times higher than normal. This was the ultimate form of control, extending even beyond death. The state didn't just kill, it assimilated the enemy. But it would soon learn that it was far more important to consume the soul, not the body. So we see a complex, expensive, ritualized mechanism of destruction. But why? Why couldn't the empire make do with a simple hanging? What was the deeper meaning behind these incredible efforts? The answer seems obvious: to demonstrate absolute power and total intimidation. This explanation appears sufficient, but fear was only a byproduct. The real goal was philosophical. The state was not just frightening people, it was proving its right to define what a human being's and its ability to unmake anyone, stripping them of that status. We've examined the how, but to understand why the word replaced the knife, we must understand the why. Why did the state need to invade a person's soul through their body? The answer lies in the philosophy of destruction itself. Why do totalitarian regimes love public trials so much? A quiet liquidation in a basement is simpler and doesn't create martyrs. What is the value of this costly theater? The obvious answer: to teach a lesson, to stage a spectacle of power for intimidation. But this is only the first layer. The executioner here is not a monster reveling in pain. He is a dispassionate priest performing a state ritual. Violence here is not an emotion, but a technology. In this ritual, the state acted like a wax seal. The execution was not murder, but the act of stamping void on a human life, so that all could see who holds the authority to certify reality. But this seemingly omnipotent technology had a fundamental flaw. It had learned how to erase a person, but it did not know how to erase an idea from their head. This is precisely why the victims of the most brutal tortures often maintained their inner resistance. Why didn't maximum pain guarantee maximum submission? The psyche has defense mechanisms: dissociation, acceptance. A person can mentally disconnect from their body, preserving their self. But it's not just about spiritual strength. Physical force has its limits. Some Lingchi executions lasted up to 6 hours and involved over 3,000 cuts. This is equivalent to watching 3 feature-length films where every frame is an act of pain. But at some point, the body either dies or goes into shock. In either case, control over it is lost. Power cannot torture a body indefinitely without destroying it. Thus, it realized it was fighting the war on the wrong territory, leaving the main citadel untouched, the consciousness. It needed to find a way to make a person torture himself from the inside. The poet Wen Tianxiang, executed in the 13th century, declared before his death, "History will remember only my loyal thoughts." His execution became a symbol of defiance for hundreds of years. From the state's perspective, this was a complete failure. The man died, but his idea, captured in a final act of defiance, only grew stronger. He became a martyr. Power faced a problem. Killing the carrier of an idea was not enough. It had to learn how to kill the idea itself, inside the carrier, to force him to renounce it himself. And to do that, it had to change the battlefield entirely, moving it from the public square into the human mind. So, physical pain has its limits. It creates heroes and does not guarantee submission. How could power overcome this barrier? It seemed the solution was simply to make torture even more sophisticated. But this path led to a dead end. The real breakthrough occurred when power shifted its paradigm. It ceased to be the executioner and decided to become the doctor. It stopped breaking the body and started healing the mind. It stopped beating out confessions and started pursuing sincere repentance. The key to absolute control lay not in the heaviest blow to the body, but in abandoning the body altogether. The old power said, "Suffer and die." The new power would say, "Repent and live, a new life that we will create for you." But what if the victim can escape while still chained to the post? There is a phenomenon known as dissociation. Under the stress of unbearable pain, the psyche can separate from the body. The person begins to perceive the torture as if it were happening to someone else. This is a defense mechanism of the brain, an emergency release of endorphins. But for the executioner, this is a total ideological defeat. He still controls the body, but he has completely lost access to the consciousness. His main tool, pain, has stopped working. As long as the consciousness can retreat into this inner sanctuary, it is invulnerable. To gain total control, it was necessary to find a way to attack not the body, but the very connection between consciousness and reality. This explains the legend of General Yuan Chenghuan, who did not make a sound during his execution. The simple version: he was a warrior of incredible willpower. But this very heroism was the main problem for the state. The spectacle of intimidation turned into its opposite. The crowd that was supposed to be horrified began to admire him. Instead of an example of submission, the state had single-handedly created a legend of resistance. Physical torture has a fundamental flaw. It creates martyrs. And the new power needed a weapon that didn't create heroes, but forced them to debunk themselves. And this weapon had to be found. On April 24, 1905, China officially abolished the Lingchi execution. At first glance, this was an act of humanism, the result of Western influence. But the reality was pragmatic. After photographs of the executions, taken by French soldiers, circulated around the world, the ritual ceased to inspire awe. It began to provoke disgust and undermine the authority of the state. The tool had broken. The abolition of Lingchi was not the end of cruelty. It was the beginning of an arms race for a new, more perfect cruelty. The knife was sheathed not out of mercy, but because in the laboratories of power, a far sharper weapon was already being forged. The body was no longer an effective target. It either died, resisted, or shut down. But how can you torture something that has no nerve endings? How do you break something you cannot touch? This task seemed impossible. The weapon for this new war was found not in the arsenals of executioners, but in party meetings. Its birth was quiet, inconspicuous, and all the more terrifying for it. Before, the tool was a piece of steel. Now, it would be your neighbor, your friend, and your own mind turned against you. How do you inflict pain, equal to physical torture, without touching the body? For the new inventors of control, this was the main technical challenge. The first solutions were still semi-physical: sleep deprivation, deafening silence, a monotonous diet. This seemed like simple exhaustion. But the real breakthrough came when the main target became not the body's endurance, but man's social nature. Complete isolation. It acts on the psyche like a total vacuum on the body. In the absence of external pressure, gazes, and voices, a person's inner self begins to disintegrate. The new weapon was not about what was done to you, but what you were deprived of. But isolation was only the preparation. The real horror began when the broken person was returned to other people. Why did hardened revolutionaries in the first re-education camps begin to confess without a single blow? The superficial answer: a system of rewards. Cooperation earned an extra bowl of rice. Stubbornness meant a return to isolation. Simple conditioning. But the real engine of the system was different. Group pressure. The main tormentors became other prisoners, already broken. They criticized, humiliated, and condemned the holdout 24 hours a day. In a normal prison, there was one guard for every 10 or 15 inmates. Here, for every one unbroken person, there were 15 guards from among his own comrades. Power had found a way to outsource the violence to the victims themselves. The technology was ready. Mao Zedong just had to scale it from a single cell to the entire country. How did the American psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton manage to crack this technology without access to secret archives? In 1956, he interviewed 40 people who had survived re-education. He simply listened, and he saw the system: an assault on identity, the inducement of guilt, a public confession, and a symbolic rebirth. His discovery was shocking. Brainwashing was not some Asian mysticism. It was a step-by-step replicable technology. A psychological breakdown could be put on an assembly line like a car. The West realized with horror that it was facing a war for the mind for which it was unprepared. And at that very moment, the architect of this war was already turning hundreds of millions of people into its component parts. The technology was perfected in prisons. But how do you apply it not to hundreds of inmates, but to 600 million citizens? It seems impossible. The standard solution: a huge army of secret police and informers. But Mao's idea was more radical. Why create an army of overseers when you can make everyone an overseer? Every citizen had to become an instrument of control for their neighbor, friend, and family member. The entire country was turned into one endless group criticism session. During the Cultural Revolution, some 200 million people were drawn into this terror. It's as if the entire populations of the United States and Germany simultaneously became both victims and executioners. We are now entering Mao Zedong's arsenal, and we will dissect his three main tools, each aimed at destroying one of the pillars of the human personality. The first tool: public self-criticism. How do you make a person who tells lies about themselves under pressure eventually come to sincerely believe them? This breaks all logic of willpower and inner resistance. The simplest answer comes from psychology: cognitive dissonance. The brain cannot tolerate the conflict between an action, a public confession, and a thought: I am innocent. To relieve the tension, the psyche takes the easy way out. It changes the thought to match the words being spoken. But when tens of millions go through this ritual, it ceases to be psychology. It becomes technology. When lying becomes the collective norm, individual truth becomes a dangerous deviation. Self-criticism was not a humiliation, but a surgical tool for removing personal history. After a session, a person could no longer remember what they thought before it. Their memory had been overwritten, but this was only the destruction of the person from within. The next mechanism turned those he trusted most into his executioners. The second tool, group pressure. What made colleagues, neighbors, and even family members become cruel accusers in struggle sessions? The obvious answer: fear and herd instinct. To avoid becoming the next victim, it was easiest to join the crowd. But behind this screen of survival lay a cold strategy. In May 1966, Mao Zedong launched the Cultural Revolution. Its goal was not chaos, but the atomization of society. To destroy all horizontal bonds, all trust between people, so that the only vertical bond, the only source of security and truth, would be the party. Millions of families were destroyed from within. This was a technology for creating total dependence. When everyone around you is a potential enemy, the only savior is the leader. Having destroyed trust in others, the system took on the last pillar of a person's identity: trust in oneself. The third tool, rewriting the past. Why force a person to rewrite their life story dozens of times, adding new crimes with each version? On the surface, it looks like a sophisticated interrogation method. Investigators look for inconsistencies to confuse the victim and get a confession. But the real goal was more terrifying. It was a direct assault on memory. Personal memory is not a stone tablet, mat, but a path in a forest. Every time you recall it, you tread that path anew. The system forced a person to forge a new false path dozens of times until the old true one was completely overgrown. After the 20th version of his autobiography, he could no longer distinguish real events from fabricated crimes. His self had been erased. But every machine requires fuel. What made millions of people go through these circles of hell? The most obvious answer is fear. Fear of pain, isolation, death. But fear explains submission, not fanatical belief. Many victims didn't just break, they became the most ardent and sincere supporters of the regime. This is the central paradox. Fear could not create love. The darkest secret of this system is that it preyed not on human weaknesses, but on basic human needs. It drove a person to complete despair and then offered the illusion of salvation, forgiveness, and acceptance back into the collective. This is how it made the victim love their tormentors. We have now come to the very heart of the darkness. This mechanism worked by creating a vacuum. The system sucked all the air out of a person: hope, will, identity, and then it opened the only valve through which life-saving oxygen, branded with the party logo, was supplied. Why did victims who had gone through unimaginable humiliation begin to feel gratitude towards their tormentors? The conventional answer: Stockholm Syndrome. A protective psychological response where a hostage begins to sympathize with their aggressor. But here, it was not an accident. It was a technology. The system first brought a person to a state of psychological death. Then, at the moment of complete despair, an interrogator would suddenly offer a path to forgiveness. The party became the monopolist on salvation. It was both the cause of the terror and the only way out of it. Gratitude for the illusions of salvation proved stronger than the memory of real torment. Now, let's look at this process through the eyes of a victim. Imagine Professor Chen, 52 years old. He is held out for 3 weeks. He is certain of his innocence and believes in justice. He endures hardship because his inner world is not broken. He tells himself that his family and friends know the truth. His resilience is based on his faith in people. But at the next struggle session, there is a turn. Under the dim light of a single bulb, he sees his 15-year-old daughter, avoiding his gaze, read from a sheet of paper in a trembling voice, accusing him of bourgeois deviationism. It is a blow that is impossible to defend against. His world collapses. The system purposefully struck at the most vulnerable point, human attachments. By destroying them, it left a person in an absolute vacuum. The only family ready to accept him after his repentance is the party. And in that moment of despair, a strange sense of relief is born. Why, after the most terrible betrayal, could a person experience not only pain, but also joy? This is called the euphoria of confession. After months of pressure and humiliation, the moment of surrender brings a purely physiological relief. The struggle is over, but it was something more. It was a staged ritual of rebirth. The old, stubborn personality symbolically died. In its place, a new, correct one was born, which the collective immediately welcomed back. Yesterday's tormentor shook his hand, called him comrade. The psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton called this the euphoria of oneness, a powerful feeling of merging with an omnipotent force. The system took everything away, only to then give back the basic right to be part of society. The man was grateful for his return to the family. And now, he was ready for the final act, the public execution of his former self. We have dissected all the tools. Now we are ready to witness the final transformation. A man stands before a crowd, ready to confess. At first glance, this is just a formality. But in reality, it is a conscious act of psychological suicide. This is psychological Lingchi. Where the executioner cut off pieces of the body, here the man, with his own words, cuts off pieces of his soul, beliefs, memories, attachments. In the next section, the culmination of our investigation, we will witness this final confession. The moment when the mind becomes the executioner, and the victim and the killer are one and the same. We will finally understand why this method proved to be more terrifying than 1,000 knives. There he stands on the podium. The air is electrified, but the main question is not what he will say, but what he feels. Fear, shame. He recites memorized, self-deprecating phrases. For the crowd, it's a performance for survival, but he is no longer acting. The voices of the critics he heard for months have become his own. His consciousness has turned into a sieve. It filters his entire life, leaving only the facts that confirm his new imposed guilt. The executioner is no longer needed on the outside. He has moved inside. This is why Mao's victims were broken completely. One man loses his body, but keeps his self. Another keeps his body, but loses his self. So what is the key advantage of the invisible weapon? Remember General Yuan. His body is methodically destroyed, but his spirit is unbroken. Now look at the man on the podium. His body is intact, but his personality is annihilated. Physical pain comes from the outside. It has a source that can be resisted and a limit: death or loss of consciousness. But how do you defend against yourself? When your own mind convinces you of your guilt, when your memory is rewritten, resistance becomes impossible. The enemy is inside the fortress. Mao's psychological terror did not just break the will, it reprogrammed the very operating system of the personality. It turned the consciousness into a perfect torture instrument, working 24 hours a day without any guards. One person's identity is erased. But what scar did this leave on the soul of an entire nation? What happened to the millions who formerly survived? Many remained broken forever, eternally suspicious of everyone around them. But it's not just about personal tragedies. The scars from this violence ran deeper. They manifested in shattered social trust, in a fear that was passed down to children, becoming part of the cultural code. Lingchi was a horrific but finite act. It killed one person. Mao's system did not kill the body, it infected the soul. And this infection spread throughout society, creating a legacy of fear. The Communist Party of China itself, in 1981, officially recognized the Cultural Revolution as a grave blunder. The war for the mind was won. But was it a final victory? It seems so. We have seen a perfect and merciless mechanism in action, but the very fact that we can analyze it today challenges this conclusion. How do we know all this? From the memoirs of survivors, from secret diaries, from the testimonies of those who managed to reassemble themselves after being broken. If the system were absolutely effective, these sources simply would not exist. This proves that even when a personality seems erased, a spark of consciousness can survive somewhere in the depths. We have traveled the entire path from the executioner's knife to the commissar's word. In the final section, we will bring all the threads together and ask you one question that will make you think about the nature of fear. The path from the executioner's knife to the commissar's word is not a change in tactics. It is the inexorable evolution of control technologies. Lingchi was the pinnacle of physical terror of its time, a public theater of pain designed for maximum intimidation. But on April 24, 1905, it was abolished, acknowledging the fundamental limit of this tool. It could destroy the body, but often left the spirit unbroken. This created a demand for a new weapon. Mao's arsenal was the answer. His methods were not mere cruelty, but a quasi-scientific system that bypassed the barrier of the flesh and learned to penetrate the consciousness. Despite the difference in instruments, the imperial executioner and the party re-educator had one goal: the surgical removal of any identity that placed itself above the will of the state. But the executioner was a butcher. He crudely severed a person from society, leaving behind a corpse and a legend. The re-educator, however, was a neurosurgeon. He did not kill the patient. He entered his brain and selectively removed memory, beliefs, and will, replacing them with party-approved implants. The result was incomparably more effective. Instead of a dead enemy, the state gained a living, loyal, and sincerely grateful supporter. This is why psychological terror won. Physical violence creates martyrs. Psychological violence creates converts. It does not destroy enemies. It assimilates them. It is a weapon that makes the victim love their cage. But its main danger lies elsewhere. The scars from a knife are visible. They evoke sympathy. The scars from a word are invisible. A person who has been reforged is outwardly whole, but their self has been destroyed. And because no one can see their wounds, they never heal. Many of those rehabilitated after the Cultural Revolution refused their exoneration, believing in their guilt for the rest of their lives. We have seen two pinnacles of horror: the theater of absolute pain, which destroys the body, and the quiet surgery of the mind, which erases the personality. What, in your opinion, is more terrifying? An executioner with a knife, whom you hate until your last breath, or a comrade with a word, whom you eventually learn to love? Write just one word in the comments that reflects your choice: knife or word. Let's see what we fear more: the destruction of the body or the consumption of the soul.